Hi everyone, and welcome to the Hands-On CISO podcast. My name is Ziri, and today we'll be talking to Holger Sontag. Holger has been working around or in security hands-on for about 23 years, mostly on an international level in internal departments, as well as on the vendor side. Currently, he's the CISO of Privé, an international wealth management provider. Holger, great to have you. How are you doing?
Thank you. Great to be here. Yeah, I'm doing great. How are you?
Perfect. Excited for this conversation. So before we get into anything else, I'd love to hear, how did you end up in security? How did you get into the field?
It's actually, well, it's a long story, but I'm very short. I've always been kind of interested in technology and in security, and I guess this comes from different angles as well. I guess one of the main angles is the concept of solving puzzles and the idea of just having this thing that you don't understand, and you kind of want to break into it and break it down and understand what it means in detail. And security just offers a lot of that. The thing is, there are roughly three different categories of people who work in security. Those that do it because it changes something, it does something good, it helps people who just don't have the understanding or don't want to, cannot get there in terms of knowledge. The second group is the people who are in it because of the nitty-gritty details of things and putting things in place, and the third, people who are in it because it's a very well-paying job. And I'm sort of the first category, where I really feel like it's a way for me just to make things a little bit more easy and a little bit better for people who just don't have the knowledge or the understanding of how to do it by themselves. So I see it as obligation also on my side a little bit.
Interesting. So you've been both in like companies as CISO, but also you were on the vendor side. How does that, like, what are the differences in the day-to-day?
It's a completely different task. On the vendor side, I was more in business development, pre-sales, and consulting. And I mean that the consulting bit kind of carries over, where you are becoming sort of an internal consultant if you work inside of the company in an internal department. And that's really the cut over. The difference is then on the internal side, you have a lot more of the daily tasks, audits, monitoring, adjusting alerting rules, all these kind of things. And if you work on the vendor side, it's really a lot more customer interaction. And the difference between a consultant and an internal personnel is in the end a little bit the ongoing doing. So not the initial setting things up, and then the consultant helps to set things up, and then he goes away. and the day-to-day having to live with it. This is kind of the difference, I guess, the biggest difference.
Interesting. So what you're doing now, you're in a fintech company. Would you say that affects the type of things you do significantly, or different companies tend to have similar CISO roles from your experience? Company.
Yeah. So I cannot speak for all industries. I just don't know all of the industries well enough. But what I do know is, especially in the area where we are present, which is Southeast Asia, Bay Area, and a little bit in Europe. Europe is simple, but there are a lot of regulations and laws that our customers have to abide by. And consequently, we have to also understand and work with. That means we have a lot of audits. We are getting audits every few weeks from some customer. And there is a lot of requirements that we have to understand and we have to fulfill. And I guess this could be one of the major things that, banking, working with banks, working with insurance companies, this kind of data is just extremely protected. And that means that we also then have to make sure that we fulfill our part in this. And also guessing that compared to industrial environment, that our security requirements are probably a lot higher. And this then also means, of course, that we just need to have a bigger investment in it. We have to understand a lot more laws around it. We have to make things click a little bit better. Certifications like ISO 27001, etc., than really just a normal thing to have in this industry. Whereas, I guess, if you are a CISO of a sawmill, it's probably not that important. I'm guessing. I don't know. Maybe it is.
Yeah, I think like each industry has different things, but the regulated industries seem to be the most like data protective. Let's put it that way, like health and financial. Cool.
Yeah.
How do you stay updated in this field that is really like changing so fast every other day? You have this breach, this technology, like everything's happening. How do you stay updated?
I think this is something that I hear a lot, and where I really think like you have to separate the fields. There's some things that will not change. Like you need endpoint protection, you need a firewall, things like this. This will be the same. This was the same 10 years ago. It will be the same 20 years in the future, probably. It's just what is underneath that is changing. And if you work with vendors for firewalls, endpoint protection, and you kind of see what the technology brings, then you will this part is very easy to stay up to date with, because some of it just manages itself. You have a firewall with a firewall vendor. You have a testing system. You push the patches regularly to the test. You see if it works. If it doesn't work, you don't. And if it works, then your system is up to date. So this is a simple task where you don't really need that much information aside from what the vendor anyway gives you. Where it becomes more complicated is, of course, vulnerabilities, etc., breaches, things like that. Does this affect us? And this is really more along the lines of risk management. With vulnerabilities, we work a lot with the general vulnerabilities, breaches, attacks. We work a lot with external threat intelligence providers. Some are directly connected into our SIEM. Others we have as additional information for enrichment. And if something bigger happens, I've found one of the two best sources to quickly get code snippets for running POCs, for detecting if this affects you in any way, shape, or form, are Twitter and GitHub. I mean, of course, you always need to check these scripts. You shouldn't just copy paste them. But aside from that, this is where the security community comes together and really quickly shares information. And hey, this affects this, and I tested it on a couple of systems, and you can run the script, and then you go into your testing chamber sandbox, you test what it does, and then you run it in your environment, and you have essentially saved, like, I don't know, a couple of hours of work right there, and you're much faster than the competition. So this is kind of the way we kind of keep up with things.
Interesting. So have you noticed different kind of cultures regarding security in different companies you've worked at?
Oh, definitely. Not just worked and what worked with. So I have actually built the security in two companies that I've worked in. And I worked in a security company where everyone was a security person. And most people. And I mean, first of all, if you work in a security company where people understand security, then the way people interact with technology is just completely different, because they just leverage on from a completely different mindset of what a computer can and cannot do. And they understand there's a lot less communication needed to persuade them of things. And on the other hand, people that like to leave their laptops unlocked, there's a lot more things that will come at them. But if you work so I have supported companies that have a very small, very low security culture. And this for some it was historical, for some it was just something I never thought about. And this is difficult, because if there's no mindset that we need to do this now, but the mindset is our customers require us to have a policy, then you can essentially forget it. until the mindset is set, all you can do is write a policy and make sure you stay away from the rest, because it will never reach where it needs to reach, because people are not receptive. They don't want to deal with it. They don't see it as necessary. Whereas in companies where the culture is already geared towards, we need security because it is important, no matter how many people, if you have some managers and some of the staff in that direction, you've already won. The rest will just follow and pursue. So I think that building and understanding that security is needed is probably the most difficult. And once you have that, everything else is kind of just budget discussions. That's kind of the difference between the companies. I would say that some have this culture, some don't. But I don't think there's a difference between a tech company, a development company, and a Fintech company once they have the same understanding about security. Only what they need is then different. But this is anyway. This is from company to company different. They have different processes.
Yeah, more about the culture, less about the kind of company. Interesting. Have you ever had to be the bad cop?
I mean, okay, let's put it like this. I think the user error, I call it that. I think the user error comes from 3 different angles. 2 of them are definitely something where security is involved. The third one is something where legal is involved. And the first 2 are essentially the mistake and the negligence, right? And I would say the mistake is something that there is no bad cop here. Maybe you feel a bit like a teacher sometimes, but this is just a person who just doesn't know it any better, and it's an honest mistake. And usually this is more of an extended awareness training than anything else. And there is no bad cop. There is just a person who needs to understand something and wants to understand it. Usually, I never had this situation where someone said, "I don't care." Usually, it's always that they quickly, sorry, my mistake, and let's see what we can make. How we can make sure never. This is kind of the most common occurrence of this kind of interaction. The negligence is very rare. It happens, but it's really rare. And of course, when people get caught knowing they shouldn't have done something, then they always feel bad about it, right? This is just human nature. You don't like getting caught. It doesn't mean they feel bad about having done it. They mean they feel bad about getting caught. And let's put it like this. I have never experienced someone being negligent twice. Not because of how I deal with it, but just because they understand that these things get found out, and then they understand that they feel bad about it. And you don't need to be a bad cop. You just need to say, "Hey, what happened here? Can you explain?" And then you talk about it. I've never had, luckily in companies I worked as, I've never had a case of purposeful misconduct. I was involved in incident response cases where this was the case, but I didn't do the communication there. But this is then really not for security. Security just figures it out and then hands it over to legal, right? This is then for the lawyers to handle. Because at that point you have a crime, and it's a whole different story.
Have you ever been part of a company or worked with a company that had a severe security incident?
No, but I have supported companies that had.
How does that look like?
Day one, a lot of people running around being extremely nervous, not knowing what to say, hoping experts have a silver bullet to figure it out, realizing that if you have never put any sensors into your network, it's too late to do it once it happens. Figuring out how to deal with it without the customers noticing it, this kind of stuff. Day 2, things have calmed down a little. Most people haven't slept the whole night and are high on coffee. And you're sitting in a room and you're trying to then install things that help you clear out the network. And suddenly the budget is just completely open and buy the best thing, buy the best thing, buy the best thing. And from there, it kind of depends what the incident includes. I mean, things get handled on a very different level. Especially when a lot of money is involved. Typically, security is only making the report, and then the rest is handled through a very different level of authority. And when it's about data recovery, etc., then it really depends on what the company is wants to do here or can even do here. But if a company is well prepared, I've also had one case where that was the case. They had everything in place, and we were essentially just coming in, looking at the logs, quickly being able to trace everything, and the whole thing was very well organized. We had a room fully set up for this. There was a local security guy, a very small company, but they had a guy dedicated for security who knew everything, who could help us with everything. And this made the whole situation really easy to deal with. So it depends. If you have a good security posture, incidents are, I mean, they're never a good thing, right? But they're easy to deal with, and or let's say more easily to deal with, because you kind of know where to look, what to look for, what happened. It's easy to trace. It's easy to then mitigate. It's easy to follow what happened on the network or on the application or whatever. If you have a bad security posture and you don't have anyone who ever thought about it, then you have a bunch of people running around headlessly and not knowing what to do. And it gets super complicated, because you first have to manage the people, and you have to manage the situation, and then you have to figure out what you can do to actually, get ahead of the situation. So that's kind of how it is, essentially.
How do you handle the stress of a situation like that?
Coffee. I would say it is. If it was my own company, I think I would be a lot more stressed about it. If I had a bad security, let's say I'm day one CISO, something happens, nothing is prepared, and it's my responsibility, then I would be very stressed about it. But if you come in as a consultant, you anyway already have the mindset that, okay, I am here to tell these people how to work with it, and if they don't want it, then I can go again. You kind of, you're a bit more detached from the situation. And this gives you a little bit of this energy where you can just say, we can work together on this, and let me just show you step by step, and calm down people. And this people management thing then becomes a lot more easy, because you are not directly involved. It's not like your head is not on the chopping board for this. Whereas if it's your own company, it's different, a little bit of a different story. So this is not an advice for CISOs. This is an advice for consultants. But if you're a CISO, I mean, I was not in a situation yet as in the position of a CISO that I had that something like this happened. But as a CISO, I think it is super, super, super important to always then at that moment, like, think back to what you have in your hand, and just calm down about the initial stress that something big might have happened and you don't know what, and go into the details of step-by-step retracing what happened. And then you go out, do your communication once you have understood the situation. And if it takes a bit longer, it takes a bit longer, but it will take a lot longer if you first panic about it. So that's kind of the way I would see it.
Perfect. How do you manage the balance between security and business?
Well, I mean, actually, really in accordance with ISO 27001, right? I mean, there is a clear statement on how security needs to support business, and this statement we take very seriously. And this was built up and is updated regularly whenever things change. Can security? I think the better question is: can security always support business? And I think no, but I think it can get very close to that. There will always be moments of trade-off. I'm really saying moments, because not all security tools are a hindrance. Let's take password management. If you use a password store like some centralized encrypted password manager, then actually life becomes easier, because people don't have to type passwords. They just have to click a button and it's all done for them. So this is a security tool that makes business even more fluid. So suddenly we are not just supporting, we are enhancing the capabilities of the business teams. And then a lot of things are just zero touch, like having an endpoint protection, like EDR or something installed that silently runs in the background, does not disrupt business and disrupts no one. It just have it installed, and for the most part, no one will ever know about it. I'd say what we use is something that 4 or 5 people in the company have had gotten in touch with since we've installed it, right? It's just so silent. And firewalls block a few websites, and people don't like that. And this is a little bit more iffy, but then you have to communicate why these websites are blocked. And this is more about communication. So it kind of depends on the tool, on the control, on the process you have in place, which is disruptive, which is enhancing. And you kind of have to align that as good as possible, or as well as possible with the requirements of the business. But in the end, the company culture has to make the decision what's more important, whether it's more important to follow a bit more security or to make business a little bit more, to share this document with the whole company, even though it doesn't need to be. That's kind of the trade-off in the end, right?
Interesting. Do you remember any action or decision that you made in the past that ended up being maybe not the best decision to make in terms of security? And then, like, how do you cope when the mistake is like on your hand?
That's actually a tough question. So I don't think I have made a very dire mistake yet. You always know when it's too late, right? I would have to think about this. I mean, I think there are less optimal situations and more optimal situations, and it also a little bit depends on what you have at your disposal. And I think in the first company I worked with, we had a bit of a hiccup with the antivirus tool of choice. This was just because the budget was too low and I had to take what was given. And I do regret that decision because today, or even back then, I knew this was not the tool that could get the job done to my satisfaction. How was it? I mean, we ran with it for a little bit and then we changed it. It was not a huge deal. It was, we had a free of charge tool. Back then, a company was testing a centralized version of their tool. We used it. It didn't have any huge impact. But a lot of the developers in the company got a little bit angry because the tool was very invasive and so on. And, so it was more of a internal communication issue at the end. Otherwise, typically you don't just make a decision and run with it, right? You kind of evaluate what this decision is and how it works. So there's not really, like if you do your homework right and you talk to the right people, then there's not really a situation where you make a massively dire mistake that takes everything down. This is just not going to happen because there's so many steps in between and so many people you talk to and so many evaluations you do. I mean, we don't just install software. Usually there's a big sandbox. We test the software. If it's safe to install and so on and so forth. It's a huge process. That's kind of the reality of it.
That's good, I guess.
Yeah.
Perfect. So what would you say are the biggest challenges in cybersecurity right now?
In general, I mean, the biggest challenge is always the user, but I don't want to go that route because I think everyone has talked about that already. It's kind of everyone knows it. That's why I think there's currently I'd say 2 challenges that I feel is maybe understood wrong most of the time or not talked about enough. One in Europe is for sure the upcoming 2 new regulations, NIS2 and DORA, which are massively misunderstood because a lot of people just don't want to read 100 pages of legal text, and I understand that, neither do I, but I did. And there's a lot of misconceptions of what these laws do and how they affect someone and so on. And I think the communication here that customers understand that if companies are ready and how to distinguish between a company that's ready and is not ready is a very big deal right now. There's a lot of very rough decisions being made based on assumptions that are just simply not true. And the second thing is, I mean, a lot of people talk about AI. I have not yet seen AI hack a server or anything like that. But what I have seen is that phishing attacks get a lot more pervasive, persuasive. That's the right word. So we are seeing AI-based voice messages and what coming through WhatsApp and stuff like this that sound partially already quite good. I mean, you can still make a clear distinction. And there's a big question of how to validate users in the future. Like if someone is on a business trip and the timing is just right, and he contacts you over WhatsApp from a new number from that specific country, this is all stuff you can find out, and sends a voice message that sounds good enough, then there's really very little the person can do to validate or to get over the belief if he's not schooled in it. So I think awareness training has to adapt. Tools have to adapt. We are going to publish a white paper on this in some short time, where we have a couple of ideas about how to deal with this. But it's I think these are the two topics that are currently spinning around me most, I would say.
How do you feel about AI in general?
The tool. I mean, I think AI is one of the most misunderstood tools of our time. I have heard people's imagination runs wild with this. I have heard the wildest things of what AI is supposedly capable of. I think there was like a short video that circled where AI supposedly contacted someone on Fiverr to solve a captcha for it and so on. Like, this is all not what AI can do, right? It's a large language model. It's essentially a very complex database query. I use it a lot for different, as a tool for different things, not to write my texts, but I mean, for development, for example, our developers use it for getting code snippets that they would otherwise need to get from Stack Overflow. So it's just a Google search. Essentially, it's made a bit easier. I use it for some detection mechanisms, but of course you always have to validate the output, because AI can also be very, very wrong and be very proud of it being wrong. And I use it with some vulnerability testing and pen testing tools that we have inside the company. But it's always just an initial way to get a few more things done than with non-AI based tools. It's not really a tool that you can fully, like, I made my pen test because AI said so, right? You do it as initial poking around, and then you look at what the AI did, and then you do the rest, right? So it's kind of like that. There's a lot of tools right now that are, especially in cybersecurity, very interesting. A lot are really more toys than something you can really use, but it's an interesting insight into what people think it could be used for. So I'm always open testing, finding out.
Interesting. What do you think is one thing that people who are outside security don't really understand about what it is that security people do, or at all about?
I think it depends on the person. I think what most people don't understand about security, if I have to take one topic, is the scope. I think for a lot of people, the scope is kind of, security is installing an antivirus tool on my system and then seeing what it does. Or it's, I think in your questionnaire, there was a question about phishing. I also knew a guy who thought that security was just writing correct code. I think these are just I think some misconceptions are just like, come from a place where people just do not want to understand what it is. And this is then always quite difficult to deal with. But I think most people just don't understand the total scope of what security can include. I mean, for example, a good friend of mine, very technical, has a very good understanding of the rough scope of security, but even he is surprised sometimes what all can be attached to this if you really blow it up. So a complete security system that you would install essentially tackles so many topics, partially administrative, process-based, or just pure toolage. Controls can be done in many different ways. It tackles legal topics. It tackles stability topics, resilience topics. There's just so many things that people don't know is also part of security. I think this is the biggest misconception, just the scope.
Interesting. How do you manage your attention between, on the one hand, actually taking care of the security side, then also having a team and managing them, and also creating a culture that is security aware to some degree? Like you have to have some communication, I would assume, with the people in the company. And then also communicating at all times with management, like what is happening and like understanding what they need, what you need. Where does your focus go on a daily basis, put it that way?
Okay, so managing the tools, managing the team is the easy part. This is management. But the thing is, I have not yet worked in big security teams. So it's like 20, 40 people. And I will never, because it's just not how I work. I am very hands-on. I also like to be hands-on. And if I work in a team, even though I lead the team, I will be part of the team. And we all have tasks in this team, and everyone can replace. There's always enough people in the team to replace someone who's on holiday, who's sick or whatever. So there's never a gap. Then there's certain strengths. For example, if I have a guy who can pen test really well, then he's going to do the internal pen tests. But aside from that, if he doesn't do that, then he's also supporting the monitoring, auditing, etc. And the bigger the team grows, the more the management will become management, and it will be more around figuring out where to put people and what to do with them, and less actually being hands-on with the tools. And that's kind of that aspect of it. What was the rest of the question?
The question was, how is your focus divided between communication with leadership and the security side and the team?
So I have always worked extremely autonomously, and that means the communication with leadership is essentially a monthly meeting most of the time, unless something is really burning and we need a direct communication. And I also, this is the way I have always worked in every company. I am very self-managed. I never really enjoy to have people poke around in my business. So and it has always been it's always output driven, etc. So the communication, I am CISO, I am in charge of it. It's essentially only most of the time it's with finance about budget, additional budget needs or budget cuts or whatever, things like that, whenever things happen, right? But with my direct line manager, who's the CEO, it is really catching up on the current topics regularly. And if something happens, we have an extra call. And if he's here in Munich, we go for a beer. But that's the whole communication. When it comes to company culture, all I can say is use awareness training to make it interesting. I have seen awareness training where a company is invited, they listen to a couple of PowerPoint slides, and afterwards they get a multiple choice test. Yes, this scales really well, but everyone will be annoyed by it. No one will understand the purpose. No one will understand the meaning. No one will really grasp what it's about. And you will have done the checkbox for your ISO certification or SOC 2 certification, but you will not have actual a culture of security. You will have people who have checkboxes. But you can use the awareness training to make security fun and interesting. And now I sound like a real boomer. I make it fun now for you. But I think that if you go into discussions, if you make the test part of the training, make it an open discussion. Yes, some people will just say something and then not listen to the rest, but most people will participate. They want to know, they want to understand. And once the discussion is rolling, more ideas will come up. And I've had extreme good success. It doesn't scale well, but if you have the opportunity to not work in a 300,000 people company, but something a lot smaller, then do this because this will build the culture a lot faster than you might think. You do one round of awareness training and people are talking about it. And then if the leadership team is following a couple of shining examples you're in a meeting and then the CEO is just installing updates because they pop up now. And this is more important. This will this will work. And if this is done on a small scale, everyone will follow because they understand, this is the way this works here. It's not the guy in sales who doesn't care about security and just wants to do stuff, right? It's always the person who is under enough time pressure to just not understand anymore what's correct, because no one shows him that this is correct. This is always the problem with the bunch. Sorry, put some memes into your awareness trainings. Don't make them so dry.
Make it fun.
Make it fun.
Perfect. How do you deal with the stress of, it's kind of like the question from before, but as CISO, you're always on. Like, you're always, okay, like, I'm ready for something to happen and then respond. Do you think that affects you in any way, or is it something that you kind of gotten used to and now is not really a thing?
Pure paranoia mode all day, every day. No, I mean, I'm going to be very honest. I think most people who work in the field for long enough will kind of tell you the same thing, that you get used to the possibility of an email or an alert popping in many different ways, so much so that it just becomes an everyday task. You know, like an accountant looks at Excel sheets all day, I look at alerts all day. And you get a routine in it and how to deal with it. There are processes that make it a lot easier where you can just say, okay, first initial steps. And you're not anymore like, oh my God, I need to look at my phone right now, because even though I am now currently on a Saturday on a walk in the middle of the forest, I need to see if something is happening. You will know, the phone will vibrate, and then you will know. So you kind of just ease yourself up about it, and what happens. And you also, I mean, let's put it like this. Not just most, like by far the most alerts that come in are anyway false positives, or need readjustments, or are like maybe directly false positives, but nothing dire, nothing problematic. And are anyway mitigated. So the tool is just telling you, I kicked out some software I didn't like, right? And that's what you get then as an alert. Or the firewall says I blocked the connection. So most of the stuff is anyway already done by the tools fully automatically. So you kind of, whenever an alert email or an alert, we have 3 systems where alerts go in, and all 3 systems work independently of each other. So we always ensure that at least one of them gets the alert through. And whenever you get then those 3 notifications, they come through 3 different channels, then you already kind of in the mindset of it's probably already taken care of, it's probably already done. And only when you look at it then and see, okay, this is not yet done, then things get serious. But since most of the time phone vibrates, laptop makes a notification, whatever, then you kind of like, it's one of these. You build a knowledge base on what is what.
Interesting. What would you say is one thing that CISOs probably don't pay enough attention to and should?
I don't know. I don't know what other CISOs pay attention to. But what I see when working with other companies, with other security teams is, especially in certain situations, is that I really see that a lot of emphasis is placed on documentation and not so much on controls. So everyone has policies and written down processes and everything looks nice. And yes, we have that too, of course, because it's a requirement for ISO. But whether or not the controls that you put there are actually doing what you expect them to do, I think, so if you do internal audits, I'm sure a lot of CISOs do that, but if you do internal audits, have a control check be part of the audit. Because I have seen companies where it's just, we have the policy, we have the process, we bought an AV, now everything's fine. It's not. You have to test the AV. You have to test whether or not it does what you think it does. Because enough times it just doesn't. So we have a weekly checkup of all tools and a daily checkup, a rough checkup of everything in the morning if it works. And I've come across enough moments where something was just not aligned as it should have been. And nothing crazy yet, but this alone tells me that these checkups are just essential. I'm not sure if everyone pays attention to that. Maybe they do, maybe they don't.
It's just your little piece of advice in case they're not.
In case there is someone, do it.
Perfect. Okay, so what do you think changed about cybersecurity within the last few years? Like, what is different today?
I mean, under the hood, a lot. On the service level, not so much. I think that the parameter has shifted a little bit. I think especially the biggest change I see, where I really think like this is really something where we need new concepts, or we have brought in new concepts also on service level, is during COVID, this whole work from home thing. Where the perimeter is now suddenly no longer a controlled company firewall network, but the perimeter is essentially the laptop of the person. And the home network, and you have to tell people not to go to Starbucks and stuff like that. And I think this was always kind of there a little bit, but the extent of it has just changed. Like before, you could say there is a work from home policy and you can do this if you have X, Y, Z. Now kind of everyone is expecting to work a couple of days from home. And you can't tell a whole company of people to buy a router that can segregate their home network from private to company and so on. So these things become a challenge now. And I think this was the biggest change, that the perimeter shifted more to on-device. So you need a lot better device protection, also for Mac, also for Linux. Every device needs to be protected properly. The attack vectors are different, but a MacBook is not more secure than a Windows device if treated correctly. Big misconception on many ends. You're not invulnerable to good attacks. But so you need to take, so I think it's important for companies to really, really invest in good endpoint protection. And we also saw that it makes sense to evaluate first. We saw it with CrowdStrike, right? You should evaluate what you buy. Pushing an update without testing it is not a good idea, but there are, of course, alternatives that are a lot better, that do this a lot more streamlined. But an EDR, I think, is necessary nowadays on endpoints. There's no way around it. It depends on what the endpoint does, what the EDR needs to do.
Perfect. And what do you think is going to change within the next few years?
I think that the concept of work from home is going to be, remote work is going to become a lot bigger still. I mean, we've not reached the pinnacle of that yet. A lot of companies are still trying to get people back into the offices. And some are successful, some are not. I think this also means that company culture is going to be a big topic in many companies. I think that companies have to reinvent themselves a little bit in terms of employer branding when it comes to how they get people to be in the office, to build a culture in the office again. We are currently actually doing this quite successfully, I would say, that we are getting the people to come back with like, there's a breakfast on Monday, there's a nice get together in the evening on Fridays, and in between, we have kind of little things, enticements. It's also a little bit about communication in that sense, but it will always be important that mobile devices, mobile workspaces are really taken into consideration. That topics like VPN, like not talking about like NordVPN, I'm talking about like company VPN, proper endpoint protection, maybe even mobile small ad hoc network concepts are put into place. So if you have the money and you can afford it as a company, it's a very good idea to give people who work from home or who work remotely access points with 5G modules in them, things like that they can just build secure networks at home. There's many ways to handle this, right? But I think that it's going to go in that direction, that security becomes mobile and no longer this big infrastructure with your two huge firewalls that protect 1,000 people, but more of a, how do I protect a single person, a single device in a single network.
Amazing. So we're down to the last question. Thank you so much. This has been really interesting. I lost my train of thought, but I'm really happy you joined us today, and I feel like I learned personally so much. So I would want to hear from you. What would you say is one piece of maybe unusual advice you would give to someone who is wanting to get into security, or maybe is in security but wants to advance and like go up the ladder to be CISO? What would you say?
Do not chase certificates. Okay, this sounds weird, but it's important to understand best practices. I'm not saying certificates are bad. I'm not saying you should never have certificates. I'm saying that a lot of people just try to grapple for certificates wherever they can, and not really for, it's you have to put the hands into the machine to understand how it works, and not just into the book. And projects, secure your own home network, understand how things work, understand what they really do, understand what an IDS, IPS system really is, and not just understand that you need it. Understand how it works, what it controls, what it filters. All of these things are so much more important. If you have already the knowledge of what works and what doesn't work, and you then go into certification, you then get the administrative level in, the knowledge of how to work with it. You're on a completely different level when you come out of there. Whereas if you first just shovel in all the knowledge of this is needed and ISO requires this and this certificate requires that, and then you go into the doing, you will realize that a lot of these things just work very different in real life. And sometimes you just need a completely different tool to solve a problem. And this flexibility can only come from a place of trying and testing. Roughly said, if you are in your home network running a Windows 11 device with standard pre-installed anti-malware software behind a Fritzbox, then you should probably reconsider working in security maybe. Whereas if you have a completely rigged up net where you have a little Linux device being a shore wall firewall or IP firewall that you can configure and install by yourself, you've just figured out a couple of vulnerabilities in your Gentoo Linux kernel, then you're probably the perfect person for security. Kind of in a very extreme way, you can put it like that, right? Have private projects, be fascinated by it, work on security and not just in security.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, sure.